So I was rewatching last episode, and I got to say, definitely a little low energy, and I wanted to apologize, basically, partly for that, but really, we got a little bit of an update for my wife and her eye. That day was kind of a crap day. What happened was we got a call from our doctor. So recall that she had two eye surgeries on that one eye because the retina keeps detaching. And the doctor basically called her earlier that day, basically saying like this case was like beyond his abilities and he wanted to refer us to someone else. And, just we had a very real conversation, just being like, listen, what do you do if you just lose sight in that eye? You know? Um, it's really scary. Yeah, anyway, so that was what happened with I think me last week. This week it's sort
Yeah.
of a new fresh thing. I went into the dentist. A wisdom tooth appears like infected. They gave me some antibiotics and basically were like, you got to take that tooth out. Anyway, we don't like people, guys don't offer up this kind of like intimate information to each other. Like, this is the first time I'm telling you this. If we weren't recording this, I wouldn't tell you this like out of nowhere and you probably wouldn't ask. I don't know why that's definitely a thing difference between guys and gals. My wife, for instance, just recently we had our first play date with our kid and the mom came over and afterwards she's sharing like all this really sensitive like health information from this woman that they like just met, you know? It's just how'd you guys even get to this topic? I mean, if I just met a guy, I'd be, lucky to figure out kind of what he's interested in.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe. But every once in a while, my neighbor and I will like kind of do a project on our border or something. Recently, we like took down a tree. There was like a big storm and a branch had fallen onto another tree and it was kind of close to the power line and all this kind of weird stuff. And we're talking and it's just like, I know my wife afterwards is going to pepper me with all these like kind of questions, like what's going on, or give me some intel. And it's just like, look, I don't want to, it's just, if he doesn't offer it, I'm not going to ask. And it's just like it's totally a difference between guys and gals. I don't know what it is. You could not meet up with a friend for 10 years. You spend an hour or two checking up with them. The wife is like, oh, so, where's he working? And you're just like, oh, that's a good question. I don't know. It's like, what were you guys doing for 2 hours? Like, oh, we were talking about like old video games we used to play. I like,
I
and
don't
it's
know what that
totally
is.
true.
That's
And I don't know what it is.
throughout the entirety of my life. It's exactly the same.
What do we got this week? We got a lot to talk about.
So we've said it recently in the past. We'd be doing ourselves and the audience a disservice if we didn't talk about the war and what's happened over the past week, what's different right now, what's not different at this point yet. Other big one, I think sort of big one, is every week AI is in the news again. There's a specific new thing that came out that's prompting some specific conversations related to banks from Federal Reserve and Treasury officials. More war and more AI. This is feeling like Groundhog Day a little bit.
A little bit, yeah. I mean, it was tariffs. It was just tariffs felt like every week around this time last year.
Yeah.
So I guess, maybe this is just part of the process of kind of learning about this stuff.
So after those first round of talks didn't quite work out, Trump's response to that was instead to institute his own naval blockade over the strait, basically calling Iran's bluff so they couldn't say anymore, we're picking and choosing who can or can't get through. And that actually proved to be quite effective. We haven't heard anything from Iran directly on this, so it's like, kind of take it with a grain of salt. But the prior week, whenever Trump would say things are going so good, some kind of Iranian official would come out and say that, oh, no, that's not accurate. We're not doing this, and kind of keep everyone on edge. But this week, it was simply enough for Iran to not dispute Trump's typical bombastic language. And so as a result, markets just went straight up. The craziest thing is that by midweek, equity markets in the US were already back to all-time highs. So to the stock market at this point, it's kind of like the war never even happened. Oil is still a little bit elevated. Treasury yields in the long end are a little bit elevated as well, but both of those things have started to come off a little bit. But thing is, no rounds of formal negotiations have even happened at this point. Everything is just fueled on this optimism right now. It turns out that's all that the market really needs.
That's wild. Well, I mean, stock markets, it's all perception. If they feel good, it's going good. And then what? Xi Jinping, he came out and said a few things about it for the first time since the beginning of the war. Some people, because people kind of have theorized that Trump is really doing this just to prepare this, just kind of the Iran war, to put himself into a better position when he goes and talks to Xi in May, which I guess those talks are still going on. What's your take on that?
That's interesting. I haven't heard that interpretation. Like he's would start a conflict like this to gain some sort of leverage
Yeah.
over China in terms of the trade talks. I don't know. I haven't heard that. I find that a little bit difficult to believe. But at this level, everything is behind closed doors. The one big story that came out, I think, just over a week ago now, it was from the failing New York Times, so I take it with a grain of salt.
Failing New York Times.
But it was giving this like in the room account of basically how Trump decided to start the war in like early February. Benjamin Netanyahu and his cabinet came to the US and just gave a very direct, pointed pitch, more or less, saying that we've got this great opportunity over the coming weeks. We've identified that the Iranian leadership is going to do this like above ground public meeting. This is our moment to strike. We can take him out. Naturally, from there, the whole world's going to be great. There will never be any problems in Iran anymore. Basically, just saying that they really oversold their hand, but that was enough ultimately for Trump to kind of go with it. So just on that alone, it doesn't seem that likely that he would be using it as pure leverage against China. And to be honest, that seems like kind of a overly pronounced tactic to start a war in another part of the world to gain leverage over China in terms of trade talks.
I thought it was a possibility. It might have crossed his mind, just in the sense of, they know that Iran is providing China with a lot more of the oil. And then also in the context of Venezuela, and Venezuelan oil was going over to China just to kind of squeeze them from. So just for Trump to squeeze China from an oil perspective, that was sort of part of this 4D chess theory, maybe, that was bouncing around. I don't know how credible it is. I think Xi's come out definitely against the war. Like, what were those public comments? I guess given with like the Spanish prime minister or something, the international order is crumbling into disarray, something that Xi said. He might have been smiling when he said that. I don't think Xi necessarily likes the current world war order. Since that episode we did a little while ago, when I basically said I don't have any insight into Chinese politics, I don't know. I've been a bit on a reading binge, just about everything Xi Jinping. And I mean, just the general impression is this guy, Xi, is just all about, he's just a complete political animal. It's like, some people are sort of econ focused, but he is just all about amassing personal power. He's just like Mao in that sense. One of the things that stood out kind of when reading about him had to do with his ability to bide time and just say what needed to be said. But nothing I think that he says is credible. Like, I don't think I think he just knows that this is the right thing to say in order to advance Chinese interests, is to make America look bad and just turn people against. But like, what he actually thinks is, he talked about opposing the world's regression into the law of the jungle. But that's how he operates. He 100% operates in the law of the jungle, both personally, like in his kind of rise to power, just Chinese politics as I've learned about it to date. I mean, it is brutal. I was like reading more about the Mao era, but it is absolutely brutal, like what kind of politics are going on inside the party. But then even after that, I mean, China has not been, since Xi came to power, China has not been shy about just utilizing its strength and power, as has the U.S., in terms of advancing its own interests. You can look at like the South China Sea and sort of what it's doing with the 9-dash line, and the Hague comes around. This is supposed to be the beacon of liberalism, comes down with a ruling that says, listen, China, you can't just draw a line, literally 9 dashes on the map, and say, okay, everything in this territory is yours. There's no legal backing. And China was like, nah, we don't recognize that. We're just like, this is null and void. and then just continue to do what they were doing before. Because like, I mean, I'll say it. It's like I'm personally a realist. I think Trump's more of a realist, and maybe that's sort of one of those things that I just kind of generally gravitate more towards his view of things because we both share that fundamental philosophy. But Xi Jinping's absolutely a realist. And the thing is, you've got like China in these liberal organizations just totally playing them like the drums. I mean, you say what you got to do when it's in there, when it helps them out, but when it doesn't, you just ignore it. Um, so Australia, that was another example. It's like Australia did a couple things a while back that China did not like, and they just totally brought down the hammer. They informal sanctions, suspending beef imports from Australian, imposing tariffs on Australian barley and wine, warning Chinese citizens not to travel to Australia. I mean, China's not shy about utilizing all of its advantages when it wants to put pressure on a company. Canada, right? Remember that whole thing when Canada, it was like this Huawei chief financial officer. And this was back in like 2018. Remember that? And like the Canadians arrested her when on behalf of the Americans, and then China shoots back by just arresting a couple of Canadians. And there's like, all right, you want to play this game? It's like they don't fucking care. So like, yeah, I mean, this whole thing about him coming out and being like the international order, this and that, boo-hoo, is bullshit. I mean, just straight up, it's just like, it's laughable.
You talk about the international order and you want to write these and, play by these rules of engagement. I don't know, when push comes to shove, laws of the jungle, right?
Yeah, when they don't, well, that's the Leviathan and all that. Like whatever happens at the international level, it's just there are laws, sure, but laws don't mean anything if there's no law enforcement. So, and there is no law enforcement at that level. It's just pure power. So, I mean, and it's hilarious. It's hilarious to think that, like, when was this? I wish I had a better example, but I think Russia invaded Ukraine or something. And because Russia's like on the UN Council, the UN wanted to write like some sort of thing condemning this, and Russia vetoed it. And it's just like, how like, just, I mean, it's a joke. How insulting is that? I wish I could pull up like the specific example, but those are the kind of things you hear and you're just like, oh man, they're laughing at you. There's no way that like a group of them in Russia or in China, when something like this happens, they're not just like laughing their asses off, because they're absolutely just, you're just, I mean, as a kind of the liberal international, I don't know, utopia or something, this world government they want to make, you're just absolutely getting played. I get the dream. I understand the dream. I get it. It would be nice. But hey, let's like be honest with ourselves here. I mean, go back to like Team America World Police. Brilliant.
I keep thinking about that.
Brilliant movie. It's just like, hey, we'll write you a really nasty letter. We're going to write you a letter.
Very angry.
We'll be really, really upset. I mean, that movie came out like 20 years ago.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, anyway. I mean, I think even more recently something happened, but after Trump announced the blockade of the Strait, I think China came out and said something condemning it, when just a week earlier, before that had happened, I think the UN Council, like the UN Security Council, of which Russia and China both have veto power over, the Europeans were trying to put together, they're saying like a naval force or something to force reopening, and both Russia and China vetoed it. Makes perfect sense for Russia, just in a pure, selling energy perspective. China, a little more, why would you want to veto it? Because they benefit, they were being hurt from the lack of energy going through the strait. They probably thought that, but we can talk to Iran, we'll figure it out. And then once Trump said we're blockading it, they kind of 180'd on that, condemning Trump and doing that. It's like, well, you just vetoed some international cooperation to try to open it again, and now you're coming out and saying the opposite.
So this just reminded me, just this talk we had just now reminded me of like, John Mearsheimer, that's the realist, and he debated Jeffrey Sachs. So that's more the liberal. And I remember what stood out when I was listening to that had to do with the amount the Jeffrey Sachs used the word should. I mean, just that word has got to be, it's such a dangerous word because it already implies that something is not the case. Like it's just not true. And when Jeffrey Sachs was talking about the international this and that and what countries should and shouldn't do and how they should and should not act, just stood out so glaringly as opposed to what Sachs was arguing, which was he was using the verb to be, is. This is how it is. This is how it should be. So that's always, it's like, look, it's nice. I don't disagree. All right. But you got to see the world as it is. Anyway, kind of last thing I wanted to say, that verb should is so dangerous.
Given this outlook right now, if this thing really is over tomorrow, what are the lasting impacts and what might that mean? So I think we got our first kind of most concrete pieces of information on that over the past week as well. So again, specific to the US and China, there was various inflation data that came out over the past week now. And they're pretty much as expected, but they're still pretty pronounced, as you might expect. So US had their CPI, March CPI come out. As expected, it's, I think on a month over month basis, it printed at 1.1%. So in theory, if that were to sustain for the year, that'd be, a solid 10%, maybe, really starkly higher rate. But it all came down to energy costs, of course, kind of as expected. But in contrast, a couple days later, the PPI came out, the producer price index, and people were expecting the same kind of roughly 1% month over month increase. It came in less than half of that amount, and it actually decreased from February into March. So that one was a little bit strange because we didn't see the same feed through, and it declined month over month.
Hey, did you see, actually, it reminded me, did you see that study that came out just like a couple of weeks ago from the Fed that was trying to figure out as to why the CPI has kind of been stuck above 2%? Like they can get it down to sort of 3-ish, high twos, but then they can't get it any lower. And they're asking sort of like why, what's driving it? And if you break it down, kind of the TLDR answer is services. For whatever reason, if you like chart something after like COVID, you can sort of see the contributions to the overall increase in prices, the inflation rates. And it's kind of like broken up with there's core, there's food, there's energy, but then there's services. And after it was starting to come down, oftentimes there was even deflation in a couple of those major segments. Energy, obviously, there was some like pretty significant deflation that was pulling down the total top line number. Even goods, I think in like 2024 or something started to pull it down. But services was always such a huge chunk of that increase. And the researchers dug a little deeper. And for like, I think the UK and other people in Europe, it was like the non-housing sector services was going up. It was comprising a big chunk of it. But then in the US, it's a combination of housing and non-housing services, so like rent, and then non-housing services. And when you drill in further, it's like healthcare stuff.
On inflation more broadly, but it's services that have kept the overall up. In general, that's usually what the Fed is most concerned about, the services component, because that's what they have the most influence over. And in fact, at the peak of things, the Fed even started talking about not even just core, but super core inflation.
Oh, what fresh hell is that?
Super core is less housing.
Oh, what?
China's definitely feeling the pain as well.
Really?
Yeah.
They're going to mention they just printed their first quarter GDP and they're humming along. You know what it is? What is it, Joe?
I don't. It's got to be somewhere right around 5.
It's 5. Woo!
Yeah, 5 exactly.
5.0.
Oh yeah. Okay.
That can't miss, man. They just can't miss.
Can't miss.
I mean, I already told you like my time when I was working in China. I remember, I think I mentioned the story before, just real quick. Basically, I would use the government statistics. Like back when I was working in China, I was a market analyst. Like we had just reams, like a whole library basically of like published Chinese statistics. And like in my analysis, I often referred to it. And my boss got on my case and was like, "You got to stop citing these statistics, man. They're all BS." I'm like, "Oh, but how could they be BS? They're official." And he had me do a little side internal project that said, do your best to try to find inconsistencies across the numbers. So you can look at like, amount of coal that was used in electricity generation. You can look at separately how much electricity was generated, how much electricity was used in like these industries. And like, sure enough, after not too long, you just start to find some serious questions that were like breaking the laws of physics, just like they were producing, more electricity than is like physically per unit coal than is like physically possible. 50% efficiencies, which is just like impossible for coal and stuff like. It was crazy how it followed the study that we did followed the growth exactly, but it was consistently 2%, 2 percentage points lower. So like they would point at 5, but in reality it was like 3. Oh, I say reality, just like our numbers were like 2%. And since then, it's like I'm part of that camp where it's just like I can't trust it. All it means to me is that this is what kind of they want the growth to be at minimum. It's hard to do kind of like armchair economic analysis when it's just you don't have any really good info. So
Yeah, and that's what's so viciously difficult about Chinese data. Not only, like you just said, are they kind of barely believable at best. In recent years, too, they've been kind of systematically stopping what they're even printing anymore.
right,
It's
yeah, that's the other thing. Just like the amount of data that's kind of available is getting less and less. Yeah. And like, I
mhm.
don't want to necessarily fault the guys at the top. I mean, it just has to do with the incentive structure that they set up. I mean, we talked about on that episode, that bull bear paragraph episode. It's like China's problems according to China. That episode a little while back. They gave them the scorecard. They basically are telling the people in the government and in the party. It's just like score high on these metrics. It is a perennial problem with kind of bureaucracies and the CYA and the cover your ass and the stuff that you do just to sort of get high on this scorecard. Yeah, it's like a serious problem, and like they're aware of it. Like Xi Jinping's totally aware of it, but it's just I don't know what else to do. You got to rely on the people in government. Can't do it yourself. So anyway, incentive structures.
In trying to look for some clues, it's been very difficult to try to find anything, but I did see one index. So China's PPIs did increase. It looks like for the past 12 months, it's been consistently deflationary, but in March now, it has finally increased again. So this is the one, I guess, from the government officially. It doesn't tell a clear picture. It generally shows things bump up a little bit from February to March, but I think a cleaner one. So there's some offshoots, I think, from S&P that do kind of unofficial indices over there. Over the past year, it's been solidly deflationary month after month. Just there's just too much production over there. Prices to produce new goods are just going lower and lower each month. But now we've got a blue bar again. March 26th, things have started to increase again finally. And we started to touch on this a little bit. I forget if it was last week or over that bull versus bear episode, where it's like, could this energy shock help pull China out of their kind of developing deflationary spiral? And I guess the answer to that looks like yes, looks like it could be. But either way, this is not the kind of inflation that really anyone wants. And so if we look back a little bit more, basically since COVID, it's just been consistently deflationary month after month after month.
Wow, interesting. Yeah, I'm not familiar with this. That's a PP. Okay. Yeah, cool. And you got a little blue right at the very end. Very nice.
Here it
First
is. It's
time
back.
since like what's that month? The last blue.
Yeah, this is like since like
September
their
2022.
COVID stuff kind of ramped up quite a bit, I think.
Oh, interesting. Oh, cool. You want to talk about the end of the world? So that was on the docket with AI and bank security and cyber.
Just about a week ago, Anthropic made an announcement of their new model that they're coming out with. It's super great. It's going to be better than every other model, but you can't have it. They're saying that it's so good, it's too powerful.
It's so dangerous, right?
It's so good, it's dangerous, is exactly what they said. It kind of, back to, Team America, like back to South Park. I don't know if you remember, like way back, there was the one episode where I think like Cartman gets like a insurance payout or something like that, and he uses like $1 million to buy a struggling theme park. And so because he doesn't want to wait in lines at the theme parks, he just buys the whole thing.
Everybody, check out the all-new Cartman Land. It's our grand opening. Cartman Land has over 100 fabulous rides, 6 roller coasters, and tons of great surprises. And the best part is, you can't come.
And then over time, he's forced to start hiring people. Then it becomes crowded again, and
Yeah, I didn't get that. Yeah, no, that's a good connection.
Yeah,
right. This is so good. Yeah, right. We can only let a small number of people. Yeah, right. That brilliant marketing. But I guess it got the attention of some government officials, though, right? Our boy Scotty B, and then Powell.
Apparently, there was this last-minute urgent meeting that Scott Bessent and Jay Powell called, like all of the CEOs of the major U.S. banks, for this urgent cybersecurity meeting. And so Anthropic said that this model is so dangerous specifically because of its cybersecurity potential to basically just wreak havoc on the world's software systems. They were making like some pretty extreme claims about just what it could do. Any web browser in any operating system, it found multiple zero-day vulnerabilities. And by 0 day, it just means that people would have 0 days time to fix it because someone already found it before anyone was already aware of it. So that's like the truest sense of like, okay, wait a minute. Is the AI just rehashing its training data in an interesting way and kind of fooling us to say it found something new? Or no one even knew about this hack before. No one even knew about this vulnerability. It found it, people went and validated it, and then that's when they kind of said, here's our break the glass moment.
Yeah, that's pretty terrifying if all that is true. That's pretty scary. This is stuff that's like in production, right? I mean, it's like real. This has been through, millions of sort of simulated tests or whatever, and then it has like real world experience for decades or something, and then it was able to find vulnerabilities. Yeah, that's a problem.
Yeah, I think one of them was like in the Linux kernel itself. So it's like Linux, the kind of baseline operating system for like all computing infrastructure, like anywhere. It's like you and I use Windows or, a Mac for personal computing. But whenever you're setting up networks and large systems that basically facilitate web traffic and banking services and all these things, like they're run on a different operating system called Linux. And so including that, this model apparently found these vulnerabilities that it not only was able to identify, but then put together an exploit as well. So that's what they said made it like truly dangerous. Previous models could find holes in things, but it wasn't kind of capable enough to make use of it. So this new one also, it could, start at the outside of some secure network and then make it just break in completely. Yeah, so it's a big problem, but this is what Anthropic's saying. So it's like, is this really credible? There's another website here that apparently is this collection of like cybersecurity experts that track these things. And they've got this website called the 0 Day Clock. And so it's like I mentioned before, 0 day in that if you hear about it, you've got 0 days to fix it because no one's told you about it before.
Yeah, it just means new, right? It just means previously
It just
unknown.
means new, exactly.
Okay, thank you. Just a fancy sort of like, okay, fine. Everyone's got it. All right. People in finance, we got our own, special words for stuff that are just, grossly overcomplicated and they just make us sound smart. Okay. How many
That's exactly
bips?
right.
Right. Whatever you want to do. They got 0 day. All right. It's fine.
This one was really pretty shocking. So this chart is showing once you identify something, how long do you have on average to fix it? So whenever you find security holes, what's the amount of time before you can reasonably expect a hacker to take advantage of it? So not even that long ago, back, so it says 2018, on average 2.3 years. So less than 10 years ago, you had on the order of multiple years potentially to patch up a security bug in your system by the time you heard about it. And so you see that kind of steadily come down in the years following that, 2 years to, 1 year to now 11 months. But once the AI craze really started here by 23, now you're down to just about half a year. And then into 2024, you're just over a month, 25, less than a month. And the most shocking part is that by 2026, so far, they're saying, so less than halfway through the year, you're already on the order of just hours, apparently. So this is a reflection of what the capability of this new class of models is showing you. So this is just like the really scary piece. And so that's effectively why Scott Bessent and Jay Powell needed to urgently get together bank leaders and say, this looks like it could be a systemic issue.
Have you ever thought about like what a cyber attack would be on the financial system? It could be pretty terrifying.
Right. So that's kind of like the next round of, I guess, risks now to the financial system, whether it comes through in. So it's always persisted, but I think it's just going to be supercharged now. So now there's, I guess, more recent talk about having specific capital requirements tied to cybersecurity, which I don't think was the case before. The US hasn't said it officially yet, but actually in the UK, I think they just came out with something saying that they're formally going to start implementing something like that.
Really? So like a separate amount of capital you got to hold. So like in the US, cybersecurity has always been taken extremely seriously by banks. And I think, but it's tucked underneath a separate risk, operational risk. And like the way in which, I guess, there is no direct tie between like a bank's, whatever the assessment is from regulators over a bank's sort of cyber security strength and then how much capital they have to hold. But it does sort of flow through what's called CCAR. So like the way they would do it, it would be indirect. And the biggest banks, in addition to usually like the 8% or so minimum capital that they have to hold, there's a bunch of other buffers that regulators have added on top of that. And ops risk arguably gets included into that buffer. And so that's where it comes in. That's where cybersecurity would go in. Basically, they just make banks, the Federal Reserve would give banks like a scenario. And they'd say, hey, imagine someday there's like all these terrible things happen. What would happen to your capital level over the next 9 quarters? And then depending on how far it goes down is how big the buffer needs to be. And one of those things that happens could be like a cyber attack. And that can hurt the bank in a bunch of ways. It might just like, maybe it requires just stealing funds directly or something from the bank. It could be kind of like a ransomware sort of thing where like they grab a bunch of their clients' data and they say, hey, pay us a whole bunch of money. The stealing funds, you heard it. You remember the Bangladesh bank attack in 2016? Hear about that? Stuff like that, where they just go in and they were able to kind of get the SWIFT access, because like these banks have access to SWIFT, and they can just have give into the messaging system and just have them give pay orders to move the bank's money out to whatever account. That was like a really cool case. I think it tied back to like North Korea, but the way in which he was able to do it was just take advantage of like time zone changes. So whereby like they would make a payment order on the New York Fed when the Bangladeshi bank was like asleep, basically. They just like weren't at their desk, and they went to the Philippines, which was also like not at their desk. The Fed was able to stop a bunch of the payments, but like 81 million or something got through.
Wow.
You could do like ransomware attacks. So you could just like shut down the operations. That would be like a military thing. And like every once in a while, man, if someone is sometimes like wires or whatever, they're just not going through. That's not uncommon.
Mm-hmm.
And you can imagine if it was just systemic and it happened for days, stuff would really be messed up. Data breaches, obviously. The most recent kind of funny one had to do with the OCC itself. The OCC, did you hear about that? This was last year.
No.
Yeah, that was so you didn't hear about that? Yeah, the OCC had a data breach. Someone got someone hacked into their emails. And so obviously the OCC, they weren't invited to a lot of meetings for a while after that. I mean, it's like a real thing. It's just the OCC is telling banks to like up their cybersecurity, and then they get hacked themselves. So, obviously, one of the bigger risks is like if Bank of America or something got hacked and there was just no confidence anymore in B of A, that somebody didn't either have their deposits weren't safe, or they were just started issuing your own money out, people would run on that bank. So that's pretty scary if like these things are real. That's like a national security kind of thing.
I wonder if there will be a more concerted effort in the US to regulate those things more specifically. So the UK has already taken early steps to do it. Like you said, it's already tucked within operational risk, but I wonder if that gets broken out and kind of blown up even more.
I wanted to give you one other thought. I don't know if you want to make this like a running segment, but the United States, it is a land of laws, so maybe we should keep our finger on the pulse of some of the more interesting laws coming down the pipeline. Elizabeth Warren, she's been busy. The Direct File Act. So it's basically just says that the IRS Direct File program. So that was like a government-run thing where individuals could just submit their taxes directly to the IRS, and they didn't have to go through like TurboTax or something.
Okay. Oh yeah.
Basically, what it is it's making TurboTax and all those like tax prep software companies would just get subsumed and absorbed by the government, and they would just provide it to you for free. Sounds nice.
Sounds great.
Ultimately, generally giving the government having to do more services, I'm generally against, because I don't think they do a particularly great job. I don't know. What's your sort of initial reaction?
If the government takes over the service provided by a private company, it's only a matter of time before it just like completely degrades.
Taxes are like so ungodly complicated. That's the thing. This is like the big thing that I sort of struggle with all this. At one point, it's nice to, but if you do go through this Direct File Act and it's the government and like you filled out their form and you like did it right and they still don't give you the right number, it's their fault. It's kind of the government's fault. Like at the end of the day, it is a little strange that the government's sort of just trusting you that you do your taxes properly and that you follow them and give them the right number. They just kind of have to trust you. And there's always a fear, obviously, of them auditing you. That's really what it is. They just randomly audit you and you're in big trouble. For people who just kind of live on a W-2, it's not too bad. But when you start getting up higher in net worth and stuff like that, yeah, it gets much more complicated. So and then at that point, like, what does she propose? So incredibly complicated. You need professionals. And in fact, like you can't even, a normal person as of now can't submit to the IRS. You need to get certain people who have been like licensed, who have like their signature actually means something to the IRS before you can submit it. A CPA, for example, could do it, but then there are other people. So
yeah,
I don't know. I'm just skeptical. It's just like so complicated.
Completely skeptical. And so that's like, it's almost kind of like ironic that Liz Warren is going to say the government's going to provide this service. Like, well, no, you shouldn't.
But she's just a huge government person.
That's what I mean. So it's like, you shouldn't have a complicated system and say, okay, now the government's going to give you another service to deal with the complicated system it's giving you in the first place. You should, as a lawmaker, you should just reduce some of the complexity of the tax system. You would think, but yeah, she's just a huge government person.
The other bill that came out, this is in California though, the AB 2624.
Yeah, the Quality Learning Center bill.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, so you heard about that? Yeah,
Briefly.
the Stop Nick Shirley Act. I was curious about this. It's just like basically, as far as I can tell, providers, employees or volunteers at like quote unquote designated immigration support services facilities. So think like nonprofit offices, community legal clinics, accredited immigration sites, certain healthcare facilities who face threats of harassment. So you can imagine somebody showing up with a camera and sticking it in your face. Probably, again, who knows what the definitions are. I'm sure the definitions are. I'm sure they're broad enough. But basically, I think it'll make it so that you can't find their address. It's not official. Like right now, Nick Shirley and all these, investigative guys, that guy David, I think might have been a fake name on that video exposing what was going on in Minnesota. David was able to get a bunch of addresses. He was able to get a whole bunch of addresses. Although it's not totally clear if those were public or he got that from a contact in Washington, D.C. Because he did mention like some sort of guy in Washington, D.C. that gave him, I don't know if it was the address or if it was the actual numbers in terms of the amount of money that was being sent to these facilities or what. But like, we've done a little bit of sleuthing. Even just the last episode, we were able to get the names of like, where the money for the Department for Homeless Services. Like, you remember, like, you could see exactly how much money was spent for like each of them. It didn't have an address, but I don't see why it wouldn't be super hard to find one. I didn't try. But imagine if you did sort of dig in, and if one of those addresses decided that they were getting harassed, then all of a sudden it would be much harder, if not impossible, to find that address. That's kind of what this bill is.
But like, so it feels like I'm missing something here though. But aren't these addresses for like institutions that offer public services?
Like yeah,
childcare.
Good point.
Yes, like how,
I don't know.
Are you supposed to use it?
I don't know how that works. I think there are things like this already in place, but for different kinds of services. There is something of a precedent, but for different kinds of things. Like I think like some other healthcare related things had a similar thing. I don't know. I didn't really dig into it super deep, but I'd be curious to know. I mean, in general, if I see something like this and if a fraudster gets like really excited that the bill is going to be passed, I would have pause. I would take pause. I mean, if they lied on enough other forms, why not lie on another one to, have your address provide some protection? I don't know, man. California, it really does feel like it's just one big racket. Basically, people who can, control the primaries are just feeding off of the tax receipts. So yeah, I don't know, man. Knee-jerk reaction.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. So I mean, I guess we'll see if that actually goes anywhere.
Anyway, that was kind of the news this week.
Yeah, that's it. That's everything that happened.
Yeah, just even the small finance corner. This is some crazy times.
Yeah, for sure.
Crazy, exciting times.
So I guess with that, this has been another episode of the Root of All Evil podcast. My name's Joe.
I'm Luke.
And thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.